My ex cheated on me with my golden child brother. Karma returned to her, and I got the last laugh. Hello, read it. Some people are born into families filled with warmth, love, and encouragement, where parents cherish their children equally and celebrate their successes. Others, like me, are born into a family where they are nothing more than an afterthought, a shadow trailing behind the favored one. My name is Ethan Carter, and I am 35 years old. I spent my entire childhood, my entire life, being the second choice, the overlooked one, the disappointment. I was never the child my parents wanted. That title belonged to my older brother, Luke, from the moment he took his first breath. Luke was 5 years older than me, and for as long as I can remember, he was their golden child. If he did something, it was celebrated. If I did the same thing, it was ignored. If he made a mistake, it was a minor slip-up, brushed aside with a reassuring pat on the back. If I made a mistake, it was proof that I was a failure. It was never openly said, never directly acknowledged, but I knew, deep in my bones, that I wasn't wanted the same way he was. Maybe I was an accident. Maybe they had me just because they thought they were supposed to have another kid. Whatever the reason, my existence was tolerated, not cherished. I grew up watching Luke get everything I wanted. It started small, more attention, better gifts, words of encouragement I never received. But as we grew older, it became clearer, sharper, crueler. Luke was effortlessly good at everything. Sports, socializing, academics when he actually tried. I had to work twice as hard just to get half as much recognition, and even then, it never really mattered. The teachers at school would talk about Luke as if he were a legend. The neighborhood parents would tell me how lucky I was to have such a great older brother. My own parents couldn't stop praising him, comparing me to him, measuring me against a standard I could never meet. I remember birthdays where Luke got expensive gifts, bikes, gaming consoles, trips to amusement parks, while I got clothes I didn't ask for or books I already owned. I remember family gatherings where the conversations revolved around Luke's latest achievement while I sat silently, my presence barely acknowledged. When Luke got into trouble, my parents defended him. When I did something as minor as forgetting to take out the trash, they acted as if I had personally betrayed them. It wasn't even about the actions themselves, it was about the fact that Luke could do no wrong, and I could do no right. By the time I was in high school, I had learned to stop trying. There was no point in seeking validation from people who had already decided I wasn't worth it. Instead, I focused on getting out. College became my escape plan, the one thing that would take me far away from the shadow of my brother and the suffocating indifference of my parents. I worked hard, earned scholarships, and left without looking back. For a while, it felt like I had finally broken free. College was different. I wasn't just Luke's little brother anymore. I was my own person. I made friends who saw me for who I was, professors who recognized my hard work, and most importantly, I met Emma. She was the first person who ever truly made me feel like I mattered. She was warm, kind, and supportive, everything my family had never been. She listened to me, believed in me, and for the first time, I felt like I had something that was mine, something Luke couldn't overshadow. We fell in love fast. I didn't question it, didn't hesitate. After years of being ignored, years of being treated like I was invisible, Emma made me feel seen. We dated all through college, got married when I was 26, and I thought I had finally won. I thought I had built something for myself that my family couldn't touch, something that was beyond Luke's reach. But I was wrong. At first, it was small things. Emma started becoming distant, preoccupied, always on her phone. She started making excuses not to spend time together, brushing off my concerns with vague reassurances. Then Luke started coming around more often. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was overthinking things, but deep down, a familiar unease began to creep in. I knew how this story ended. I had seen it play out my entire life. Then, one day, I came home early from work, and everything I had built, everything I had believed in, came crashing down. I walked into my own house and found my wife with my brother. The details don't matter. The betrayal was written all over the scene in front of me. And the worst part? They didn't even look surprised. It was as if they had expected this moment, as if they had known it would come eventually, as if my pain was just an inevitability. I left that night. I didn't scream. I didn't beg for an explanation. I just walked away, because what was there left to say? I had spent my entire life coming second to Luke, and now, even in my marriage, I had lost to him again. But the betrayal didn't end there. A few months later, Emma announced she was pregnant. The baby wasn't mine. It was Luke's. As if the knife in my back wasn't deep enough, they twisted it further, making sure I would never forget just how replaceable I had always been. I cut everyone off after that. My parents, my brother, Emma. I severed every tie, erased them from my life. I poured myself into my work, building something that no one could take from me. I climbed the corporate ladder, worked harder than I ever had before, and eventually, I became someone important, someone powerful. I had built the life I had always wanted without them. I didn't need them. I didn't miss them. Then, one day, after years of silence, my phone rang. It was my mother, the same woman who had spent my entire childhood looking past me. She sounded different now, worried, uncertain. She told me that Luke was in trouble, that the family business was failing, that they needed my help. Suddenly, I was important. Suddenly, I was the son they were turning to. After a lifetime of being overlooked, ignored, and discarded, they were now reaching out, hoping I would save them. For years, I had wished they would finally see me. Now they did, but it was too late, because this time, for the first time in my life, I had all the power. The phone call echoed in my ears long after it ended. My mother's voice, once so indifferent toward me, now carried a desperate edge I had never heard before. It was almost surreal, hearing her speak to me like that, as if the decades of neglect had never happened, as if we had always been close. She told me that Luke was in trouble, that the family business was failing, that they needed my help. Not wanted, but needed. It was a word they had never associated with me before. I sat in silence, staring at my phone, feeling something unfamiliar creeping up my spine. Satisfaction? No, it was something darker, something heavier. A part of me wanted to laugh, to relish the irony of it all. My entire life, I had been nothing more than a shadow in that family, someone they dismissed without a second thought. And now, they were coming to me. After years of being invisible, I was the only one who could save them. I didn't respond right away. I let my mother's words settle, let the weight of them sink in. A younger version of me would have jumped at the chance to finally be acknowledged, to finally prove that I was worth something. But that version of me had died a long time ago, buried under the wreckage of my broken marriage and years of being overlooked. The man I had become was different, stronger, colder. I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window of my high-rise office. I had worked for everything I had. Unlike Luke, who had been handed opportunity after opportunity, I had clawed my way to the top with nothing but my own determination. I had built a name for myself in an industry that devoured weak men, and I had done it without them, without their support, without their encouragement, without their love. Now, they wanted to pretend I was part of their world again. I let them wait. For days, I ignored the calls. My mother tried again, then my father, then finally Luke himself. I almost didn't pick up, but curiosity got the best of me. I wanted to hear his voice, to hear how the golden child of our family would sound when he was the one in need. He didn't start with pleasantries. He never did. He got straight to the point, telling me that things had taken a turn for the worse. The business, our father's legacy, the empire Luke had been gifted while I was pushed to the sidelines, was on the verge of collapse. Bad investments, poor management, a few lawsuits that had drained their finances. And, of course, our parents had done what they always did, trusted Luke to fix it. Only this time he couldn't. I listened, silent, as he explained how much they needed me. Not just my money, but my expertise. I had become a known figure in the corporate world, someone who could turn struggling companies around. They knew that. That's why they were coming to me now, after all these years of pretending I didn't exist. But what struck me the most wasn't the desperation in Luke's voice. It was the lack of remorse. He spoke to me like nothing had happened, like he hadn't stolen my wife, like he hadn't destroyed my marriage, like we were still brothers in some way. As if he expected me to set everything aside because family is family. It was almost insulting. I told him I would think about it. Then I hung up, letting the silence stretch between us like an open wound. I didn't need time to think. I had already made my decision the moment my mother had called. There was no version of this story where I saved them, no scenario where I swooped in and fixed their mistakes. They had made their choice years ago, and now they had to live with it. But I wasn't done yet. The old Ethan, the one who would have quietly walked away and let karma take its course, was gone. This time, I wanted them to feel what I had felt my entire life. I wanted them to understand what it was like to be powerless, to watch everything they had built slip through their fingers, knowing there was nothing they could do to stop it. So, I decided to go see them. It had been years since I had last set foot in my childhood home, the house that had never felt like home. As I pulled up to the driveway, I could see that time hadn't been kind to it. The once pristine lawn was patchy and overgrown, the paint on the front door peeling, the windows dull and lifeless. It looked smaller than I remembered, weaker, like the illusion of grandeur my parents had built was finally crumbling. When my mother opened the door, I saw it in her face too. The years had aged her, but it was the worry in her eyes that made her look truly old. She smiled when she saw me, a hesitant, fragile thing, as if she wasn't sure how to greet the son she had ignored for so long. My father stood behind her, his expression unreadable, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. They weren't used to being the ones asking for help. And then there was Luke. He stood in the living room, looking almost the same as he always had. Handsome, confident, except now there was something else in his eyes, a flicker of unease. Maybe he had finally realized that I wasn't the same person he had once walked all over. I let them talk. I let them plead their case, lay out all the reasons why I should help them. My father tried to appeal to duty, to family legacy. My mother used sentiment, memories of childhood that she had conveniently rewritten in her mind. And Luke tried to act like none of the past mattered, like we were still brothers, like he hadn't betrayed me in the worst possible way. I listened, nodding at the right moments, watching as hope flickered in their eyes. Then, when they had said everything they needed to say, I leaned back, folded my hands, and told them my answer. No. The word hung in the air, heavier than anything else that had been spoken in that room. My mother's face fell. My father stiffened. And Luke had the audacity to look shocked, as if he had truly believed I would swoop in to save him like he had never stolen my life from me. I stood up, adjusting my suit, and looked at each of them one last time. I told them that I had spent years being nothing to them, that they had cast me aside when I was inconvenient, when I wasn't useful. And now, when they had no one else to turn to, they suddenly remembered I existed. I told them that I had built my success without them, that I had become the man I was despite their neglect. And I told them that I owed them nothing. Then I turned and walked out, leaving them in the ruins they had created. As I stepped outside, the cold air hit me, sharp and bracing. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the powerless one. For the first time, I had walked away while they were left watching, and I had never felt so free. I left my parents' house with a clarity I had never felt before. The weight of their disappointment, their indifference, their constant favoritism had always lingered over me like a storm cloud. But now, for the first time in my life, I realized that I was finally standing outside of it. It was no longer my burden. I wasn't their backup plan. I wasn't Luke's safety net. They had all burned that bridge, and now, with the flames still smoldering behind me, I knew there was no going back. For days, I ignored the phone calls. My mother tried first, then my father, and finally, Luke himself. I didn't bother answering. I had said my piece. They had spent years pretending I didn't exist, and now it was my turn to pretend they didn't either. But just when I thought it was over, just when I had started to feel like I had truly severed myself from them, my phone rang again. It was Emma. At first, I almost laughed. It had been years since I had last spoken to her. Years since I had walked away from the life we were supposed to build together, leaving her and Luke to rot in the mess they had created. I had assumed she was living the perfect life she had chosen, basking in the golden glow of my brother's success, raising the child that should have been mine in the house that I had once called home. So, why was she calling me now? I let the phone ring out. She called again, and again. On the fourth attempt, curiosity got the best of me. I answered, but I didn't speak. I wanted to hear the desperation in her voice before I said anything. She hesitated at first, probably expecting me to hang up. Then, She told me she needed to see me. It was about Luke. It was serious. I wasn't sure why, but something in her voice told me she wasn't lying. Maybe it was the slight tremble, the hesitation, or maybe it was the years of knowing her well enough to recognize when she was afraid. Whatever it was, I agreed. We met in a cafe, somewhere neutral, somewhere neither of us could claim. She looked different. Not just older, but exhausted in a way that went deeper than just sleepless nights. It was the kind of exhaustion that came from regret, from realizing that the life she had chosen had turned into a cage she couldn't escape. She didn't bother with small talk. She got straight to the point. Luke was in serious trouble. The business was collapsing, but that was just the beginning. My parents had tried to downplay the situation when they called me, hoping I'd swoop in and fix everything, but the truth was much worse than they had let on. Luke wasn't just dealing with financial troubles. He was being investigated for fraud. Millions of dollars had gone missing, and there were whispers of offshore accounts, tax evasion, and deals that could put him behind bars for a long time. And that wasn't even the worst part. Emma leaned in, lowering her voice as if someone might overhear. Luke had been planning to run. He had already started moving assets, transferring money under different names, securing a way out before everything collapsed around him. My parents had been helping him, selling off what little they had left to give him an escape route. They weren't trying to fix the situation. They were trying to hide it. She paused, her hands gripping the coffee cup in front of her. There was something else, something she wasn't sure she should say. I could see it in the way she swallowed hard, in the way she kept avoiding my gaze. Then finally she said it. Luke had another child. Not with Emma. Not with the son they had together. The one that should have been mine. No, this was someone else. A secret. A woman had come forward, claiming Luke was the father of her 6-year-old son. She had proof. DNA results, messages, financial transactions where Luke had been paying her to keep quiet. Emma's voice shook as she spoke. Not out of anger for me, but out of anger for herself. She had spent years thinking she was special, thinking that Luke had chosen her over me because they were meant to be together. But now, she was realizing the truth. She wasn't special. She was just another person Luke had used, just another person he had lied to. I let out a slow breath, processing everything she had just told me. Luke was about to lose everything. His business, his freedom, his family. And for the first time in his life, there was no one left to save him. Emma asked me what I was going to do. Was I going to help him? Was I going to step in and protect him, the way my parents always had? I leaned back, watching her, letting the silence stretch between us. No, I wasn't going to help. I was going to make sure there was no way out. I had spent my entire life watching Luke take everything he wanted, knowing that someone would always be there to clean up his mess. But not this time. This time, I was going to be the one pulling the strings. That night, I made a few calls. I had spent years building my own network, connections that Luke didn't even know existed. Within 24 hours, every one of his accounts was flagged. His assets were frozen. His exit routes were shut down. Then I did something even worse. I reached out to the woman with the secret child. I told her I had a very good lawyer, that if she wanted justice, if she wanted to make sure Luke paid for everything he had done, she had my full support. By the end of the week, the news broke. Luke Carter, the golden child, the untouchable, was now a national headline. Fraud, embezzlement, a secret child, a shattered marriage. His perfect life, the life he had stolen from me, was crumbling in front of the entire world. I sat back and watched it all unfold, watched the media tear him apart, watched my parents scramble to do damage control. But there was nothing they could do. Luke had spent his entire life believing he was invincible, that no matter what he did, someone would be there to pick up the pieces. But not this time. This time, he had no one left. And for the first time in my life, I had one. Luke was gone. The golden child, the family's pride and joy, the man who had taken everything from me without hesitation or consequence, was now nothing more than a disgraced criminal, stripped of all the power and privilege that had once shielded him from reality. His empire had crumbled, his reputation was in ruins, and he was no longer the beloved son my parents had always fought to protect. He was just another inmate waiting for trial, another fallen man who had flown too close to the sun, believing that the rules of the world didn't apply to him. I had thought that would be the end of it. That once Luke was locked away, once my parents had exhausted every last desperate attempt to fix what could no longer be fixed, I would never have to think about them again. But life had a way of reminding me that some wounds, no matter how much time passes, don't fade as easily as we want them to. For weeks after his arrest, I ignored the noise surrounding his downfall. The media was relentless, reporting on every court appearance, every failed legal maneuver, every new accusation that surfaced. Business partners turned on him. People who had once sung his praises now denied ever knowing him. The world had moved on from Luke Carter, and so had I. Then, one evening, I found something waiting for me in my mailbox. A letter. It was thick, heavier than any normal piece of mail. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. It was Luke's. I should have thrown it away. I should have tossed it in the garbage without a second thought. But something in me hesitated. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the lingering remnants of a lifetime spent in his shadow. Always wondering what was going on in his mind, what made him him. I opened it. The letter was long, pages upon pages of uneven handwriting, like he had written it all in one frantic burst. He didn't beg for forgiveness. He didn't ask for help. He didn't even try to justify his actions. He confessed. He admitted everything. The lies, the manipulation, the way he had deliberately taken everything from me, not because he needed to, but because he could. He admitted that he had never loved Emma, that she had just been another possession to him, another thing he had wanted because it had belonged to me. He had pursued her not out of love, but out of competition, out of the need to prove that he could have anything I had. He told me that for years he had believed he was untouchable, that no matter what he did, no matter how many people he used, there would always be someone there to clean up his mess. Our parents, his friends, even me. But sitting in that cold, empty prison cell, abandoned by everyone who had once worshipped him, he had finally realized the truth. He had never been stronger than me. He wrote that despite everything, he envied me. That for all the times he had belittled me, dismissed me, treated me like I was nothing, deep down he had always known that I had something he never did, the ability to survive without them. While he had spent his entire life chasing validation, depending on our parents' love, on his reputation, on his power, I had built myself from the ground up. And now, when everything was gone, he understood that I had already won a long time ago. I finished reading, folded the letter carefully, and stared at it for a long time. Then, without hesitation, I burned it. Not out of anger, not out of spite, but because it no longer mattered. For the first time in my life, Luke was just another man facing the consequences of his actions, and I was no longer a part of his story. Weeks passed. My life moved forward. My career thrived. My name carried weight in the corporate world, and I found myself rising higher than I had ever thought possible. I made new connections, built a future that had nothing to do with my past, and for the first time in my life, I felt free. Then, one evening, as I was leaving my office late, I saw someone waiting for me outside. Emma. I hadn't seen her since everything fell apart, since the divorce, since Luke's downfall. But there she was, standing in the cold, her arms crossed, shifting her weight uncomfortably. She looked different, older, not just in the way that time changed people, but in the way that consequences changed them. The years hadn't been kind to her. The confidence she once carried, the charm that had drawn me in all those years ago, was gone. In its place was something else, something hollow. She hesitated when she saw me, as if she wasn't sure how to start. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the woman I had once loved, the woman I had planned to build a life with. But that woman was long gone, buried beneath years of betrayal and regret. I didn't speak. I just waited. She took a deep breath, her voice quiet when she finally spoke. She told me she had made a mistake, that she had chosen wrong, that she had believed Luke was everything, only to realize, too late, that he was nothing, that the life she had traded our marriage for had been a lie. She said she wasn't here to ask for anything, just to tell me that she regretted it all. I listened. I let her finish. And when she was done, I simply stepped past her. She called my name once, barely above a whisper. But I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. because I'd already spent too much of my life looking back. I had spent years wondering what I had done wrong, wondering why my family never saw me, why I was never enough. I had spent years chasing after love and approval that had never been meant for me. But not anymore. Now I was only looking forward, and for the first time in my life, I was walking towards something that was mine.